to Lady Jane Books. We are here, we are live, and we are finally doing our discussion on A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Even my alarm is saying it is finally time. It's finally here.
Much anticipated.
It's like, thank goodness. Thank goodness. I am joined today with one of my dearest BookTube buddies, Kari from Very Literary Kari. Kari and I always team up and we have the best time talking about books and reading books together. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kari. I know it was like super last minute, but thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. And I wouldn't have read this book with anyone else. Let's just put it that way.
I agree. I could not picture anyone else that I'd want to read this aside from Kari. For all those that don't know, so Kari and I early on in the year decided to read Lolita, and we were all like, yeah, let's read Lolita. It's like a classic, blah, blah, blah. And then poor Kari, I was like, you know what else I want to read? A Little Life. Just the most depressing book that's probably ever been made. And let's do it in 1 year, Kari. Let's do it. So I remember I messaged you thinking, we're different people now. You know, we've read Lolita and A Little Life in 1 year. Who does that, Kari?
I feel like it's a major milestone for BookTube, for sure.
Like, I feel like I am actually a legitimate reader now, which I know doesn't make sense because if you could read Green Eggs and Ham and be a legitimate reader, but I feel like I'm in the upper echelons of bookish society now, reading those two. So
100%.
Absolutely.
We've made it.
We're here. We have conquered the mountain. So to start off, we are going to start with some non-spoilery just discussion points. I will let everyone know when it gets into more spoilery and more sensitive items. So that will be clearly marked and you will be welcome to click off. But let's start off by seeing who's around, who's joining us today. We got Sam from Greener Side of Sam. Hi, Sam. We have AJ. Hello, AJ. Thank you for joining. So, Kari, AJ actually, I believe, has already read this and was asking me what I thought about it. So I'm excited that AJ has joined us for this chat. Hello, AJ. Nice to see you.
I do have to agree with AJ. He's saying that, or they're saying that both are great writing, Lolita and A Little Life.
Yes.
And that is one thing that I thought too about both of the books. I mean, very controversial, I think, both in different ways, I suppose, but the writing was superb.
It really was. And so different from each other too. You know, you think all the classics kind of have a similar vibe to it, but they were so different. It was amazing. And then of course we have Jason Cross reads books. Hello, Jason. Good evening. And PR Far. Hello. Okay. So, Kari, I think we should get started.
Let's do this.
All right. So, first off, what were you expecting from A Little Life? And did actually reading it and knowing what the story is about meet your expectations?
Okay, so the only exposure I've had to A Little Life is through the BookTube vlogs, okay? And every vlog I have seen related to this book is just a cry fest. I mean, people just lose it. You know, they have mascara running down their face. By the end of the vlog, they look completely destroyed and disheveled. And most of the vlogs I've seen, they didn't spoil it. And they also didn't recommend it. Okay, so even if they liked the book for various reasons, they could not recommend it because they were just so disturbed by it. So I went into this book expecting emotional turmoil, which I definitely got. And I didn't expect to cry. I thought I would be one of those rare individuals that is not moved to tears by this book. And I did not cry. I'm not a crier generally. It takes a lot to make me cry. And AJ, they didn't cry and wanted to, hoping to be destroyed. Yeah. There was a lot of, I agree with AJ, there was a lot of cringy moments for sure.
Mm.
And moments of discomfort and moments of just kind of ick. I just had this feeling.
Guttural reaction.
Yeah, but I did not cry. Did you cry, Jane?
So here's the thing. I also kind of discovered this book through Noelle Gallagher's vlog, like way back, like a few years ago. And she was one of the ones that she was like on the camera, like just sobbing, like she had a time lapse. And I'm like, is she okay? Like, I don't think she's okay. And that's what really like piqued my interest in this book originally. And I kind of avoided it for a long time because I didn't want to put myself through that. And I wanted to really appreciate and experience the book. But I did cry, but not in the way that you think. I did not cry about the characters themselves. I didn't cry about the plot. But there was a couple of lines in there that really resonated with me and situations that I was in at the time. And that made me cry because I do think that this book, in some way, it's hard to say without spoiling it, but this book in some regards does tell the truth, even though the truth is extremely hard. Very early on in the book, there's some like thoughts and like perspectives that resonated with me at the time, and that's what got me, where I felt like, oh my gosh, nobody's ever said that, but it's so true. And that's what made me cry, because I think people are afraid sometimes to face certain thought processes and things like that, and to see it just so like blatantly laid out early on in the book in the character of Jude, I was like, oh my gosh, that got me. So I did cry, but I didn't cry because the book was sad. I cried because of different reasons, which I think was really interesting.
That is interesting. It is a very raw book.
Yeah.
I do feel that. So I completely understand, your connection to it, because there were a lot of things that I think young people and just people in general navigating life, even if you haven't experienced necessarily the degree of trauma that is laid out in the book, I think there are plenty of things that could resonate with you in this book. But I also think that what helped us is reading it together. I think it was a degree of emotional support there, because we weren't in this alone, right? We could come back to, our chat and send each other voice messages and stuff about things, and also tell each other like, hey, like, I'm not going to read this weekend because I just need some happy times. Like, I just can't.
Yeah, this was like what, 800 pages or something. We had to take breaks sometimes. We had to take some breaks. But I do think that partially this book will impact. Well, I'm going to save that for later. I'm going to save that for another question because it overlaps. But I wanted to say hi to Anne from Anne with the Book. A little late, but I'm excited for the discussion. Hello, Anne.
Hey,
how are you? Happy evening. Happy New Year. So I had very similar expectations, where I thought this was going to break my heart and ruin me, just like I saw with Noelle Gallagher. And it didn't do that for me in that way. I did have a reaction to it, but not as hard as I thought it was going to cry. So that was interesting. That was an interesting for me, but I think that's a solely Lady Jane type of problem, to be honest. So number 2, how did you read it? And did that affect your experience within reading this book?
Well, I read the print copy, and obviously I tagged quite a few things, which for me, with a book this big, I don't know, I like having it in hand. I like being able to flip back and forth. I don't know. That's just personal. Audiobooks I enjoy, but I'm not sure how long this audiobook would be.
It was long. It was a long one.
And sometimes with long audiobooks, I have kind of a hard time with those. So, I I think I liked having the print version rather than the audio because, like you said, there were some lines in here that really resonated with me as well. And so I could go back and just kind of reread and look at that again and again. And it was nice because we finished this book quite a while ago. I want to say November.
Long time.
Maybe
Yeah,
October.
I
It was
did
a
go
while.
back and I did go back and I tabbed some like interesting things that like.
So that was good to be able to go back and look at that
Yeah.
before we hopped on
Yeah.
the chat tonight.
I agree. I did the exact opposite. I was so intimidated by this thing that I was like, there's no way I'm going to sit down and read this page by page. Like, it's not in Lady Jane's makeup to do that. And so I actually did read it on audiobook. I sprang for it. And I think that's actually what got me through most of this, because I know like the subject matter and just the way it's written, I probably would have not continued it if I didn't have the audiobook option. But what I really liked about it is that since it's such a narrative style, and since it's talking about like people's past and traumas, it almost felt like someone was talking to me about like what had happened to them. And that kept me kind of engaged in it rather than reading it like, you know, very separately and very like, okay, this is happening on the page. It was like I was going for walks and catching up with a friend, and they were like bearing their soul to me. So for me, that kept me going. I will say that I took a long pause towards the end of this book, like a long one, like a couple weeks. And quite frankly, if I didn't have the audiobook, I don't think I would have been able to finish it. So it's interesting to hear that we had the exact opposite experiences.
See, I would have been intimidated by an audiobook that long. I don't know. Sometimes when I pull it up and I'm like, oh, wow, I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I did speed it up in some regards, in some like chapters, because I was like, okay, I have to walk or I have to go back to work. So that kind of helped me out, because if I didn't have that option, again, I probably would not have finished this one. So, but I thought it was very useful to have both, so I could kind of switch over. So good. Now, this book has been kind of called unofficially a modern classic, or a modern classic in the making. What do you think about that, Kari? Do you agree with that or do you disagree?
Yes, I think I do agree with that. And a lot of it has to do for me with the writing. It's a very immersive, descriptive, timeless, literally timeless, because we don't even know what time period this takes place in. And that can be hard to pull off. I mean, because you think about how many things there are in our daily lives that kind of give clues to what time period we're in, right? And just imagine trying to write a book that is timeless, you know? So I thought that was really well done. And, you know, there are a lot of things in this book that I think are just universal human conditions and, you know, faults and struggles. So I think there is a lot here to, you know, reflect on. And, you know, classic, it's kind of hard to say, you know, I kind of struggle with that because of the content, you know, because of how graphic it is, you know, even though a lot of the things in the book are definitely, you know, applicable to a lot of people and that sort of thing. It is very difficult to read. I mean, you know, that's a tough one, but yeah, based on the writing, based on how immersive it was, I would have to say yes.
Interesting. I'm still kind of undecided on that personally. Like, I understand what everyone's saying. Like, you don't see writing like this every day in the modern age.
Yeah.
So I do agree in that case, like her writing style could be really made into a classic.
Yeah.
But again, like the subject matter and the tone of this book,
yeah.
I'm not sure. I am not sure.
Yeah.
Again,
It's hard.
A lot of classics do kind of focus on the darker things, like Jane Eyre is obviously very dark. Tenant Wildfell Hall, like all of these really, really well-known super classics. And you can argue that this has a very similar tone, but done in a modern way. But I don't know if making a book sad constitutes it to be a classic. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so for sure.
So I still actually have not made a decision about that. But it is something that's interesting to think about. And I would like to see where it goes in the next 10 years and see. I don't think this will be assigned reading. I do not.
No, I don't.
Any syllabuses whatsoever.
No, I wouldn't say this would be assigned reading anywhere. But
no,
as far as having a kind of place in literary discussions, literary history, I can see that. I mean, I guess it depends on what your meaning of classic is.
Yeah.
Because I don't see this as being, required reading or
like
reading
a book for
that
everyone.
Yeah, or reading that the general public would even read.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think that just because something is a classic, it means that it's that fits that category either. I don't think all classics are necessarily worthy of being considered for required reading either, so.
Yeah, no, but I think, and that's a good point too, because I think we also have to define like what a classic is.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people say like, oh, everyone has to read the classics. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
If you haven't read, Frankenstein, that you haven't read literature, and I can't see that happening with this book, is what I'm saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so in
I agree with that.
Classic.
So if that's the definition of classic, then I would say I agree with you. I don't think it has a place there. But if we're talking about just giving it a title that signifies it is of superb literary quality,
oh yes,
and will be among those books still discussed in 100 years,
absolutely. And well written, well crafted. Yes, I definitely agree with that. So yeah, that's a good point to make, to define what classic means to each person. So I'm glad that we got into that.
Okay. We could do a whole video on that, Jane.
We could. You know what? It's part 2.
And what are our modern classics? Because I know my number one modern classic, or modern, to me, the greatest piece of American literature that I've read in a while is Lonesome Dove. I'm sorry.
Oh yes, I have to read that one. You just went on and on about how excited.
I'm still gushing over Lonesome Dove.
Excited, and I got to put it on my list. Maybe 2024, not 2023. Yes,
but it's a chunky one too, Jane. I'm sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. I can only handle so much at a time here, guys. This was very general, but in all the characters, because we do see a lot of characters within this book. Who was your favorite, and then who was your least favorite? And why, too? I just want to add that in. Make this
my favorite character is definitely not Jude.
Okay, I'm glad we put it out there because he's not my favorite character.
I'm going to say my favorite character might be Willem.
Ooh, that's good. Now, why?
Willem is interesting to me because, we really see how he is as a friend. I don't want to spoil anything. I'm trying to but we really see in some key moments where he steps up and he is what a true friend should be. And we also see that even though he doesn't show it outwardly and he doesn't, seek out any sort of sympathy or pity or anything like that, that he came from very desperate circumstances himself and that he has experienced quite a bit of trauma. Mm-hmm. And I almost feel like his trauma was kind of glossed over, overlooked, just because he was able to kind of handle it, I guess, in a more socially acceptable way. So yeah, I mean, I think his character was really interesting to me. And he's one that as a child, experienced being kind of shut out by his parents emotionally, because he had a handicapped brother. And so there was some, the parents, not to bash the parents, because they were dealing with a very difficult situation. And I think, emotionally they were kind of at their wits' end. And so they kind of shut off that connection with Willem. And so I think that we see reflected in Willem's adult relationships that he is being cut off emotionally and kind of pushed out. And he still steps up for those people in his life, which is just super commendable. And I really liked him. Least favorite character. This might be controversial, Jane.
Oh, dang. Let's do it. We're all about the controversy here.
Jude.
Whoa, that is controversial. Okay.
Sorry, I had to do it.
Why? Do we want to say why, or we just leave it there? Leave that simmer for a bit.
I'm torn here because, I think as readers, we all go into a book with our own life experience and our own, perspective, certainly. And I think that some of my life experiences have definitely impacted how I looked at that character. And there were many points in the book where I was just so frustrated with this character. And I almost felt like I was one of the people trying to save him and trying to help him, even though I wasn't. I'm just reading the book here. But, sometimes you get inserted in these books. You feel invested in these characters. So, I guess to say my least favorite character is Jude is a bit harsh, but it did feel like I was trying to help him and I was invested in this. And so their hurt was my hurt. I don't know. There were plenty of unlikable characters in the book, I will say that. And some of them did have, redemption in the end. But I think your least favorite character is just absolutely despicable.
That's right. And Kari is referring to Caleb, of course. Caleb. But Caleb's like the obvious choice. I like your choice a little bit better because it's not,
Well, you already picked Caleb, so I figured it had to be different.
Yes, I could not stand Caleb. I don't like anything that he stood for. I don't like his effect that he had on Jude. I just think he was pure evil from start to finish.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to write a villainous character that convincingly to the point where I had to take a break after some scenes with Caleb. I couldn't read on for a little bit. And that's hard to do, for a writer to make somebody that, because it could come off as very cartoonish. It could come off as almost like, satire or satirical, but to have a character that was so convincing and so scary, it made me hate him. So that was really hard for me to read that section. So he is my least favorite character. Do not like Caleb. Caleb can jump off a cliff. My favorite character was actually Harold. Yes. I loved how much of a father figure he was to Jude, and I love that we got the backstory of his own situation, because again, it avoided like that cartoonish, like, I'm coming in and being like a white knight to Jude, and it brought a depth to him. And I think seeing that, not to spoil or anything, but to go through what Harold did previously and then being able to open up your heart
right
to someone else, that is that is an admirable thing to do.
Yes.
And again, that's hard for a writer to capture as well in a genuine way. So I love Harold. I adored him. I really did. So
he was great. AJ, that was his favorite her favorite character too. And awesome. Then JB least favorite character
Yeah.
for AJ.
Yeah. He was a close second for me because there's nothing I dislike more than a friend that'll stab you in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was hard for me to read too. Although I was a little bit surprised that it broke so much of the friendship there. You know what I mean? Like, because,
Yeah.
you know, Jude comes off as such a forgiving person, not to himself, but to everybody around him. And he comes off as very apologetic sometimes. And he's just, so to see like that's the instance that broke their friendship was really interesting for me because it was like Jude holding his ground that he would not accept that type of treatment, which I really was proud of. But it was so interesting to see that that's what did it from JB. So I think that's a really good point. So he was my runner-up.
That was interesting to me too, because like you said, he was so forgiving of everyone else. And then, you know, Harold, he was kind of hard on Harold. There were times where that was strained. And Harold and I mean, they, like you said, he was a favorite character. I don't, yeah. And then JB, you kind of knew JB was like that, you know, like I don't know why they were so surprised by his behavior, considering what he was like generally, you know, because
and especially that knowing he's in a downward spiral.
Yeah, knowing that he was in a drug-fueled, you know, state, like I don't know, that kind of shocked me. And even in the beginning of the book, when JB was, you know, presumably not into drugs or anything, he did a lot of hurtful things to Malcolm. You know, there was an issue there because he was always pestering Malcolm about his, you know, quote unquote blackness, how he didn't consider Malcolm to be truly black, right? And there was that sort of identity you know, crisis there. And JB kind of used that and poked at it, and you know, obviously they're friends, and so that's how he treats his friends, you know, like I don't know, I wasn't shocked by his behavior at all. So yeah, I guess that was the one person that Jude actually held accountable, you know. It's kind of odd.
I also picked up on that early on when I think it was Jude was the one like pushing excuse me. JB was the one pushing Jude to kind of reveal like his story.
Yeah.
And I've known people like that too, where I'm just like, no, that's you don't need to know that. Like you either accept me as a friend without that, or you're welcome to not accept me as a friend. And so that was actually like very interesting to also see portrayed in literature because I didn't realize that there was almost an archetype for that.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. And to write a character that's so self-absorbed and just not self-aware about how he impacts and affects other people was really interesting. So he was my runner-up, but I have to say Caleb was the worst. But he was a close second.
Yeah, that whole conversation in this book around identity, and you know, you have these four friends and they meet in college, and we follow them through until they're in their 50s, I believe. So you really get to see that whole, you know, question kind of play out for them. And I thought it was really interesting and kind of, you know, appropriate, I guess, for times like these, that, you know, you have this person, JB, who is so dead set on making people reveal their identity, you know. And even with Jude, he would pester him about, you know, his racial background or ethnic makeup, which was a mystery, you know, for Jude. So, I mean, it just, that really stuck with me because it's like, why is their business, their identity, any of his business? Like, it's not. It's like you said, everybody, I think now with how things are, you know, on the internet and, you know, social media, I think people just assume that everything should be exposed.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case.
I agree.
So everyone knows that person, right? Everyone knows a JB. You know a JB. Everyone knows a JB.
Yeah. But it's so interesting to see that she like included that. You know what I mean? It's hard to write. It's hard to grasp. So I was impressed that she was able to do that so well. So I believe it may have been, I'm not sure if they're here now, but one of my fellow BookTube buddies asked me a really great question about this book on a recent live I was on. And I saved my answer and I saved it for this because I want to know your opinion. In your opinion, is this the saddest book that you have read? Tough question, isn't it? I had a hard time thinking about this. I'm still struggling with it.
You know, it's kind of hard to say because, again, this is not a book that made me cry. You know, I did not have an emotional response to it in that way. And I have cried for at least one other book that I can think of. So, and that book wasn't necessarily sad per se. It hit me a certain way. You know, I think when you're reading a book, if you're going through something at a particular time and you read something that really resonates or hits home with you, that it can provoke that sort of reaction and that sort of connection. And while I, did, find a lot of really kind of neat quotes and things about friendship and all of that, I can't say that it provoked any sort of individual response for me. As far as the content, though, I mean, the content is definitely the saddest content I've ever read. It's the most traumatic. It's the most graphic. It's all of those things that you've heard, all of the horror stories that you have heard on BookTube, about the content of this book is true. So, I mean, I guess for that reason, I would have to say, yeah, it's the saddest book. I mean, you think of anything horrific that could happen to someone in their life, and it happens in this book. I
agree. And that was actually my point as well, is that it's not the saddest as if, like, it made me cry and had an emotional impact. I have other books that just tore me down. But objectively, I'm looking at the sequence of events. It is the saddest. It's meant to be probably one of the saddest books. So I find it interesting that we had very similar opinions on that. Something I do think is very impactful about the book is that this book, I think, will have different meanings and different reactions depending on the person reading it. You know what I mean? And if someone's lived through some difficult times and really sad instances and has really suffered, hate to say it, but suffered, they're not going to have as much of an emotional reaction, I think, as someone who has not experienced those things, or, for lack of a better word, have lived in a bubble. So I do see, it definitely depends. Each reader and their life experience is going to get something different out of this book. That's partially probably the reason why I did not cry, is that I saw it as bad things are still going to happen. Wow, I can't wait to see what bad things going to happen next. And because I've had life experiences that were a little bit tougher, it was easier for me to read this than someone who it doesn't occur to them.
Right.
I think that's the main difference. So objectively, I can say, yes, it is sad, but it's not going to be the saddest book depending on the reader. Yeah. Does that make sense?
That does. And I was laughing during that just because in the chat they're talking about the fact that, if a dog doesn't die, then it can't be the saddest book. And it's funny. I was in the chat on another live just a few days ago, and we were talking about that. We were just talking about how,
Oh, I think that was mine.
Kill all the people, right, that you want to in the book, but, kill those characters. But as soon as you kill a dog, you have crossed the line.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it would be like mass, like, just sadness and terror and just the worst, like, decimation of humanity. But
Yeah.
the second a dog whimpers, I'm done.
That's it.
I'm done.
That's it.
So, yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. So that was my main, like, that was my main takeaway of this book, is that it's different for each reader that's going to read it, and depending on their experience and their perspective on life as well.
Yeah.
So.
And again, like I said, my choice of Jude as my least favorite character, again, that's just coming from my own, personal experience. So it's not, don't give me hate or anything about that. But, it just, and I don't want to get into spoilers, but yeah, if you read the book, you might find that whole situation very frustrating as well. It's almost like you want to intervene, even though it's a book, it's words on a page. You want to intervene in the situation, even though that intervention would be futile, based on what's going on and all of the really supportive characters that we have in this book. Like you said, Harold and Willem and, Malcolm. Malcolm was a really good friend. It just seems to be all for nothing.
Yeah. And similarly, like, I see that also illustrating my appreciation for Harold as the best character, because Harold reflects some people in my life that I really like and respect and admire. And so because of my life experience, I really appreciate that element, and that really touched me on an emotional level. So I agree. I definitely agree that that is how you have to go into this book. Okay, last non-spoiler question. What did you rate this book, and would you recommend it?
I don't rate books. I stopped doing that just because it's too hard with different genres. It's like, how do you actually rate, anything 5 stars? Once you've rated a classic 5 stars, how do you rate like a slasher horror book 5 stars? I don't know. It's too subjective for me. So I stopped doing it because I just would labor over it. It was ridiculous. So I don't do that anymore. But I would say this is definitely a phenomenal character-driven story. I mean, it's a story of friendship. It's a story of love, loss, grief, abuse, mental health. It's, AJ said sometimes there is no happy ending, and I think this book is definitely a reflection of that. I think there is some happiness in the book as well. I mean, there are moments of happiness. So I would say it's a highly rated book for me. It's a highly rated book because of the general themes that, kind of bring the book together and kind of keep you invested in it. There were a lot of really cool quotes about friends and how you should really, I forget what page it's on, but there's one particular quote that talks about choosing friends that are better people than you, not necessarily more talented people or wealthier people or whatever, but choosing people who are more empathetic, more kind, and I definitely agree with that. Surrounding yourself with good people. And I think that all, the friends do benefit from their friendship. I mean, even JB, he has his moments of redemption. So, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful story. It's a, tragic story, but definitely something I would not recommend for everyone. I would definitely have reservations about that. What about you, Jane?
So I agree that if you really like the art of writing, I would recommend this book. It is a beautifully written book. It's a beautifully executed book. The characters, they're lifelike. Every single one has a lot of depth and a lot of thought behind them. and she executes it so beautifully. So if you want a really nice reading experience and appreciating writing in and of itself, definitely I would recommend this book hands down. But I would say content wise, no. And that's for several reasons. First of all, this book is not for everyone. If somebody is very sensitive, I would be very hesitant of recommending this to anybody. I would not want someone to have an emotional turmoil reaction to this. So that's my hesitation for me. Also, I personally didn't care a lot for the plot. I felt like I have my own reservations about it and about the structure of the story. I personally didn't like that as much. So for those two reasons, I would not recommend it. If you're looking for like a story driven, or if you're looking for plot, and that's separate from the nature of the events itself.
Yeah.
Those are two very separate things. So that's my answer. Yes, if you're looking for really great craftsmanship. No, for the content. So
let me ask you this. Do you think if someone has no experience with mental health struggles or background in abuse and has no real perspective on that, but maybe they are becoming friends with someone who has those struggles, do you think reading this book would give them empathy or greater insight into what that is like? Do you think this is a reflection, a
Kari,
true reflection?
A brilliant question. That is absolutely
Thank you.
brilliant. Oh my goodness. That's I think because it does center a lot on Jude and Jude's situation and their history and how Jude behaves as a result of that. So, in a way to familiarize oneself, perhaps, again, everybody's situation is different. I am not a professional at any type of like psychology or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I have no credentials in having an opinion on this.
Neither of us do.
Okay,
we're not credentialed.
Just so we're clear.
We
just
don't.
So we're clear. But I do think if someone wants to try to understand maybe the struggle and the impact that some of those things can have, yes. But I would be very, very cautious in that, and they have to really understand what they're getting into.
Yeah.
I do think it's very helpful because it does show some of like the frustrating sides of like human nature and dealing with those type of struggles, and that might be valuable to some people. But I wouldn't want them to be so innocent about it that this book terrorizes them. You know what I mean? Or like turns them off in some way about those issues. So I would, but I would do that very cautiously on a case-by-case basis, personally.
Yeah.
How about you, Kari?
It's interesting because there was one, and I actually I did write the page number down for this one. Haha. There was one quote that really just did a wonderful job kind of describing why someone would hurt themselves in this way. And it's on page 474, and it says, something about the fall, the freshness of the pain had been restorative. It was honest pain, clean pain, a pain without shame or filth. And it was a different sensation than he had felt in years. I think that line and a lot of the descriptions about what happens to Jude and what Jude does to himself, I think, give us a sense of the emotion behind that. I think a lot of people would look at it and say, okay, this is not good for you. Just quit doing this. You're hurting yourself, but when you look at someone's life and they have had little or no control over what happens to them, maybe where they live, maybe what happens with their body. I think through reading this book, you could get a sense of why someone might do that. I do think this book does a good job of giving you a peek not putting you in that mindset, but really giving you a peek into that kind of struggle. And yeah, because I think that is difficult for a lot of people to understand. So yeah, that really spoke to me, just how we were able to get a little insight into that, and how the author really explained, something that's very difficult to verbalize for the individual themselves. I mean, sometimes they can't even verbalize what's happening or why they're doing something, but Jude is able to put into words and kind of describe that for us. And I don't know, I appreciated that.
Which is, again, a testament to how Hanya Yanagihara writes and is able to put that into words, because that's a very abstract concept for a lot of people. And her being able to accurately represent that is very impressive, I have to say. So that concludes our non-spoiler section. From here on out, we're going to give all the spoilers. They're going to be flying everywhere. We're going to mention things. It's going to get sad. So I invite you.
But we're not going to cry.
We're not going to cry. We've done that already. But I invite you, if you do not want to be spoiled, or if you do not like sensitive topics that we are going to discuss, you're welcome to click off this video, click off the live stream. Thank you so much for joining us. We loved having you. But we're going to get into a little bit of deeper, darker materials here. So I'm going to give everyone the chance to click off now. We're just going to sip our water and do a hydration check. And
oh yeah.
Okay, so let us begin the spoilery questions. So Kari, as you know, this book has a very interesting way of time. Okay, Anne's here for the spoilers. Anne's like, lay it on me. I'm ready.
Yeah. We read it, so you don't have to, Anne.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There we go. So this book does something really interesting, and it has a lack of time. It has a setting, which I believe is New York, mostly New York City, perhaps, but it does not give us a time frame. It does not give us a date. Does not give us a decade or anything like that. What was your impressions about that, and why do you think that was laid out that way?
Well, at first I thought I missed something, because I messaged you and I was like, wait, Jane, what year is it? What did I miss?
Right?
What's going on? So I was sure, and I was like trying to flip back and see, and yeah, I think, this was intentional for sure. And I think she was, I don't want to say she was trying too hard, because again, I loved the writing. But I can see how some people might say it was a bit pretentious. I think she was trying to make it timeless, literally. I think she was really trying to craft, a much discussed literary work. And, speaking of the abuse and the torture and the death and the grief,
By the way, the book has everything she just said in it, just so everybody's clear on what we're talking
was
about.
all of that necessary?
Yeah.
I mean, I did like the book, but at a certain point, I was almost like, come on, what else could possibly happen? Now, there was one part of the book that I'm laughing because it was so sad. It was so sad, but then it was almost like it just came out of nowhere, and it just seemed odd. I don't know.
Was that when he was captive?
No. It was actually when Willem was killed in the car accident.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you
remember.
Like,
of course.
But when Willem was killed in the car accident, they actually said that he was decapitated.
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember that. And I was like, that's a weird detail to
Yeah,
have.
and I was like, it was such a shocking kind of out of left field, and I guess to her point, that's how those things are. I mean, they're always out of left field. They're always shocking. But it was just like, I thought she had been over the top. And then that one thing, for some reason, it was just like, okay, I'm done with this book. I don't know what else could happen, because Willem was my favorite. Like, how could you? So I guess there was a little bit of that in there too.
Yeah,
But yeah, I was like, that one thing, I was like, really? She's really gonna do that to Willem? I don't know.
See, what the part that actually like bothered me was when we were first learning about Jude's background. Like she set it up in a way that if I'm recalling, because again, I read this a couple months ago, but she was like, "Oh, he was an orphan in a trash can" or something like that, and I'm like,
yeah.
Well, I know where this is going now. You know what I mean? And that bothered me a lot because it was a little like tropey.
Yeah.
And I think I saw somebody use this term, and it really applied to this book, not in relation to this book, but elsewhere. It was almost supposed to be like an urban fairy tale type of thing. The boy who's lost, who doesn't have family, and that he goes through this hard life, and his like adventures through life bring him to different monsters type of thing. And I see that in this, but having so many negative and bad things happen totally put that in perspective for me. That it was like, yeah, this is like, it's a fairy tale, especially with that setup, that he was like an orphan in a trash can. And just that really bothered me because I was like, is this where we're going with this? Like, bad enough that he is a tragic character, like just from his life experience, but you have to set it up this way, like just from the beginning, he was cursed. Type of thing. I was very uncomfortable with that. I didn't like that she set it up that way, and then that led to like other things. It just that bothered me. I didn't like that.
And yeah, I definitely see what you're saying with the tropes and like the one thing after the other, and it's like, okay, at some point, like, leave these characters alone. But how she was able to get away with it, the tropes and all of that, is the writing. The writing was so well done. I think that's why we were so like forgiving of it. And she had written these characters so well that, again, you're invested in the characters, at least one of them, whichever one that is for you, you're invested in it. But yeah, I agree with you. There were some over the top things, some tropes, and
part of the reason why I half and half with this book. I love the writing, content wise. This is my big problem with it, is that it was so miserable that it almost got boring.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So like I was a little bit like, it wasn't like, oh, what next and shocking. And maybe that relates to my, personal life experience. I don't know. But it was just like, okay, what next? It's not gonna be good. What's next?
Here's one thing too to think about. Brother Luke is like the initial abductor, abuser. He is able to get out of that situation, and then he's abducted by that other guy. I don't even remember his name. Yeah. And it's just like
doctor, right? Doctor.
I think the book could have been accomplished, the same feelings, the same effect could have been accomplished with half the torture.
Yes. I was gonna say, like, this could be a much shorter book. Much shorter book. Like a couple of those scenes could be cut. And I think it would almost be more impactful if there was less. You know what I mean? Because like, it kind of gets to be like, all right, what now? You know what I mean? What's gonna happen next? I think honestly, just having even Jude's childhood experience and having that be the basis of why he's reacting to certain things that could be very impactful, just of a story on its own. You know what I mean? It gives that gave enough depth and character to Jude's reactions that the rest of the stuff with this adult life and like the abusive relationship with Caleb, although that broke my heart, that bothered me.
Yeah.
You know, all the medical stuff and all of that, like it was almost unnecessary after that point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And that too, I think that would have made it a little bit more apparent that there were parallels. If it focused on the childhood aspect, it would have made it a little bit more apparent that Willem's relationship with Jude kind of paralleled some of his own childhood experiences.
I agree.
Because, you know, he was the one person in his family who loved and cared for his handicapped brother. And even though his brother, who was so severely ill, you know, he couldn't even talk, he was still there showing love and kindness. And that's reflected in his relationship with Jude. You know, even when Jude is closed off, even when Jude is bedridden, even when Jude is in the hospital, you know, Willem is right there. You know, so, and I think that's another reason why Willem was my favorite character, because I kind of saw that. And I don't know if everyone who reads the book sees that, because I think, again, Willem's character is, you know, taking a back seat to Jude, obviously, and everything that is happening there. But yeah, that resonated with me. And another character I liked, which we haven't mentioned, is Andy. The doctor.
Andy, we loved
He was great. We
He
loved it.
was. He was so good.
I mean, I wish I had a friend who was a doctor who would give me free medical care. And I mean, he was, you know, I really felt for his character too, because he was really walking a fine line of being a friend and being a doctor. And I can't imagine the just turmoil that he experienced with Jude and trying to treat him and trying to be respectful of him and his secrets, but also kind of knowing when he has to step in.
And step away too.
And, you know, unfortunately, I think he's in a spot because he knew that if he didn't provide the medical care for Jude, when Jude would hurt himself, that Jude would go without. Jude would go without, and he would probably die from infection. So, you know, he's kind of in a, you know, and having him committed, I mean, they do that, you know?
Yeah.
Does it work?
I can't speak to that.
You know, you know, I think that's another part of the book that is unfortunately realistic, you know, for people who have mental illness. You know, unfortunately for a lot of people, it's a cycle. You know, things will get to a crisis point.
Yeah.
And, you know, family or friends will have the person committed or beg the person to seek treatment, and they're in for a couple weeks and they come out heavily medicated and things calm down for a while, and then the cycle just starts again.
And then not knowing like when to ask for help too.
Yeah.
That can be hard.
It's really tough to find good care for that sort of illness. I mean, what do you do? What do you do as a friend? What do you do as Andy, the doctor? What do you do as Harold, the adoptive parent? Because Jude has kind of got them emotionally hostage, you know, because he knows that they love him and they do not want to be cut off from him. And that would be just the ultimate punishment and the ultimate torment for them, because they wouldn't know if he was safe. And so he can kind of use that as leverage, you know, leave me be. I can handle it, you know. And that was just hard. It was hard to watch. It's hard to read that.
And I don't think any other character illustrates that as much as Andy did. So I'm glad
Yeah.
that you brought him up.
Yeah.
And also, like, it must be weird being in Andy's position. You take the do no harm,
Yeah.
but when they're your friend, and you have to do things that they say they don't want, but if you didn't do them, you would cause them harm. That is such a fine line too. And I couldn't imagine being an individual in that type of situation either.
Yeah. You feel for everyone involved. I mean, I think this is a book that reflects how much mental illness impacts the people who suffer from mental illness and everyone around them. Unfortunately, mental illness leaves no one unscathed. Wow, this is really a downer.
I know, this is deep. Yeah. Like, I was like, I didn't expect it to get this deep. I'm just like,
we're getting pretty sad here. I know we said no crying, but I just
I know. That's all right. That's okay. So, of the four friends, what role do you think each one of them played within the book?
Okay, so JB, I think, was the clown. Mm-hmm. He's the clown. He's the artist. You commented on that art project.
Oh yeah, the hair.
He was doing at the beginning. He was going to all these barbershops and he was like collecting all this hair.
So weird. And I was like, what is this book? What are we like? I was not expecting that out of this book, like collecting hair and making everybody pick through it.
That was weird. That was so weird. I was like, why would you touch like strangers' hair? And I was just
like, is this the same book? Like,
kind of grossed out by that. But yeah, he's definitely the clown. He's the clown, and unfortunately his friends are the butt of his jokes a lot of times. Like, the thing with Malcolm, and he does like a couple of, because I think a couple of his like little art exhibits or art experiments kind of feature his friends, and they're like, okay. And then of course when he does become an accomplished artist, he uses his friends as the subjects of that art, and that becomes a huge point of contention between the friends because Jude is very private and Jude is very self-conscious about the way he looks. And I kind of got from JB too that he I don't know that he understood that fully. Like, I don't know that he quite got the extent of that until the breakdown. Like, I do see that he eventually realizes. And I think that those sorts of friends, the clown, the loud one, the one who's always got a scheme, always got, I think they're so on to the next thing for entertainment that those little nuances might be lost on them. So he definitely played that role well. I think Malcolm was a very interesting character. I think because he was the one out of the four that was from a wealthy family, I think he had a lot of guilt about that. I think he had a lot of, inner conflict about who he was and how he fit into this friend group. But I think he was a genuinely good person overall. And I do think that in the end, I believe there was a quote from JB and he's saying to Jude, like, or someone, because I think Jude was still alive at this point, like, can you believe it? Like, the two best of us have died. Willem and Malcolm. So I think he was a good person. We didn't really get as much of Malcolm as the others, so it's kind of hard to say for him. Willem, again, he's my favorite character. He's the pretty boy. He's the actor. He's the one, I think, that has charisma. I think he's the one that people gravitate to. I think that there initially was some friction within the friend group because people were jealous that Willem and Jude had their own side friendship. right? Even before they were in a relationship, I think it was pretty clear that they had a connection beyond the foursome. So I think there was some friction there. Willem, I think, becomes a very confident, accomplished actor and someone who's comfortable in himself, but he's also the one who he has struggles as well. And I think that's a good reminder that even your friends who seem to be the most extrovert and the ones who really have everything together, that they may not have everything together. So yeah, he was interesting to me. And then Jude, I mean, what do you say about Jude? What do you say? He is probably the smartest guy of the group, for sure. And he's definitely the most damaged. He's the one everyone wants to help. I mean, he's that friend. He's the one people care about. He's the one that people come together for. I mean, I don't know. It's hard. I think he might be the glue that kind of keeps the friend group together. When you really think about it. When you think about Malcolm as the architect, I'm just remembering some of the book now. So when you think of Malcolm as the architect, when he is renovating the apartment for Willem and Jude, Malcolm thinks of things to make Jude's life easier. And some of it he, is going to be kind of overtly handicap accessible. So he has to talk through those things with Jude, because of course Jude is definitely not one who wants people to see him that way. So he talks to them about some of those things, but then he also just does stuff. Like, I remember there was a scene where he built a bookcase or something a certain way, and Willem commented on it, and then Malcolm was like, well, I didn't want Jude to trip over that. Like, he thought of things
like aging also, like aging in place for Jude as well.
Without anyone asking him to, without really asking permission. He did them kind of on the slide to help his friend. I don't know. That was one thing that he did that I was like, oh, that's a really nice guy. Like, he is a nice friend.
Smart. See, I saw this whole thing as a Little Life. It's kind of like a snapshot on like the human experience. So like, and if you think about it that way, that's why she didn't do time, because this is supposed to be like a person in kind of a metaphysical type of way, a person's whole life experience in one book. And I see that these characters, they're symbols of periods of time for people's experiences, as well as the types of people that they meet. And if you think about it that way, it is actually very interesting. Like, I see Malcolm as just one of those like golden retriever type of friends, the ones that are always there for you. They're positive, and sadly, sometimes really bad things happen to them, and that's their loss and their impact is going to hurt, society and an individual probably more than anything else. I see JB as kind of like that frenemy type of relationship, that when you're young, you're all fighting, you're very antagonistic towards each other, but then when you get older and you have more life experience and perspective, you can maybe not forgive them, but at least make amends, knowing the state and the arc of life, which is really interesting. I see Jude as just like the tragic character, just the one that's like always sad, just always has like the worst luck. They're the types that they're just built tragically, unfortunately. And there's a lot of different offshoots. We could talk about that, maybe why, maybe intentional, maybe unintentional. But I see them as being like the ones that like they're heavy. They're heavy characters in life as well. And then I also see like William being like the missed opportunity in a way. So the person who's great, they have it all together. And when you lose them, it's the most destructive to an individual. It's like their absence is going to resonate through the entire life. So I do see that almost like the golden golden boy a little bit, that, you know, they're
Yeah.
just like these perfect characters. They're so great to be around. They're so positive. They're really amazing people. And when they're gone, it's felt much more heavy than, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to
No,
say, but
I really like your analysis there with the characters representing different, time periods or aspects of life, and I can totally see that too. And like with JB, he's definitely stunted in the
yeah,
early years,
yeah,
in the early, party years, fun years, and he has a hard time getting out of that, and he sees his friends launching, and that creates a lot of that resentment and
yeah,
the problems in the friendship for
yeah,
sure. And Jude, he has just internalized every horrific thing that has ever happened to him, and he wants the outside of him. And from the descriptions in the book, it sounds like Jude was actually an attractive man.
yeah. I
Like,
heard
it
that.
seems like he was attractive, even though, he had the limp and that sort of thing, like, and at time periods was in a wheelchair. Like, he was an attractive man. So there was, outside looking in, you would say he has no reason
Mm,
to feel like weird about the way he looks, but he has internalized all of these horrific things that have happened to him. And it's almost like he wanted his outside to look as damaged as he felt,
yeah,
because there's a certain point in his journey that he doesn't really hide as much, because he can't, because he's starting to just kind of free fall into the self-harm. Yeah, this keeps becoming a downer, Jane. I'm sorry.
it's the nature of the book. It's not our fault. If we tried to happy it up, it just wouldn't happen. Okay,
This would happen.
it wouldn't happen. It'd be a different discussion. Um, yeah, but that's basically how I saw this book in a grander scheme. When you take away all of the bad things that happen, you can have that be a metaphor of life. Life's gonna kick you down, type of thing, especially when you're down. So in that way, if you take it away from a very literal meaning of this happens and that happens, and you look at it from a whole perspective, I do think she is trying to grasp a little life, like a snapshot of the life experience. So I thought that was really interesting. I think that's what kind of kept me going in this book too. That I'm like, okay, I can see the bigger meaning of this. So yeah, some people have described this book as absolutely torturous. And why do you think Hanya Yanagihara decided to write such a depressing book?
You know,
It's gonna be another downer.
I haven't read anything like this before.
Hmm.
And I read horror and stuff, but that's different.
Yeah, very different.
That's completely different. It was pretty torturous. I mean, and again, I think not just the things that happened, but the sheer volume,
Yeah.
like you and I were talking about, just the sheer volume. I think that's why a lot of people think, like, okay, I'm tapping out, like, enough already. Like, I think that's why people are so, critical of her incorporation of all this. Yeah, so I think it's the sheer volume. I don't necessarily I think any of the things that happened to Jude in isolation in a book we wouldn't even be here discussing it. I don't think we would even be here discussing it. I think it is the sheer volume. It's the volume.
It's also
it's the
constant. There is
constant.
no let up to it. And even when there is, you're afraid because this book.
It's coming.
That alone makes it depressing, because it's like, we're happy, but we're not going to be happy. So
well, but also that's a good point. What you just said made me think of something. There's a scene in the book where Jude is with Caleb. And I think it's the first time that Caleb is abusive to him.
That hurts so bad.
And Jude makes a comment that, like, it was almost a relief because he knew it had to be coming. Like, he knew that everything was going too well and that he didn't deserve good things in life because that is his life experience, right? His life experience has taught him that. And so I think maybe that was the point of the sheer volume, just to kind of put us in Jude's mindset that, if so many bad things happen to you, eventually you're not surprised anymore. And you kind of expect it and you're almost desensitized to it. I think that's why, maybe we didn't cry, and maybe a lot of other readers won't have that reaction. And, it is BookTube. So there is that hype factor and the viewership factor. And of course, it's clickbait. Come on, you're going to click the video that says, "A Little Life destroyed me with, my like raccoon eyes mascara running down." Of course, we're going to click that. You and I both clicked it. We did. We clicked all that stuff.
Okay, Gallagher got me.
Nicole Gallagher, Paperback Dreams. I think I watched that one. So, it just, you got to take that into consideration too, I guess. So if you're thinking about it that way, maybe it was, the volume of it was intentional to put us in that mindset, to give us that experience.
But I think this circles back, not to go back to my own points that I did like at the very first beginning here, but I think that definitely circles back to the reader experience.
Yeah.
Because if you already have that perspective, like, I'll be out there, I am a pessimistic person sometimes. Like, I just kind of like to prepare myself for like worst possible scenarios. It's just who I am. So if you're a person like me, that's just kind of like a natural default, this book isn't going to be anything special. You know what I mean? You might find a lot resonating with it, and that might be surprising. But content-wise, I'm like, well, of course, he was an orphan in a trash can. Of course he was. You know what I mean? Yeah. So like, and that circles back to, if you haven't experienced tougher things in life, and if you aren't familiar with like these type of dynamics and this type of situation, it's going to be shocking. It's going to tear you down and cry. But I think it's almost like a reader's loss of innocence in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Which is why we're not recommending it. We're not,
exactly.
We don't want to take any innocence.
No, we don't.
We're not putting this out there as a recommendation for just anyone. So read at your own risk.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I wouldn't recommend it to everybody.
Yeah.
And for the content rise, which we already discussed. This is very full circle. Very full circle. Yeah, I will say, and I think that's also why I didn't understand the hype of this book.
Yeah.
I understand it. Like, if someone hasn't experienced that or hasn't read anything, like this, I would understand the hype if that's shocking. But overall, like, people like me don't understand the hype,
Yeah. Now, and here's the thing that I don't think everyone focuses on: the traumatic experience of reading the book. And I could almost respect it more if the hype was about the writing.
Yes.
If the hype was about the writing, I'm in it.
Yes. Okay? I will hype this book up as like a literary masterpiece for the writing. Yes.
It is one of those books when you read it, you're like, wow, you realize how, and I think sometimes you need to read a book like this every once in a while, because you kind of realize how poorly written some of the other stuff you're reading is. I think it's kind of one of those books. It's kind of like a Donna Tartt book, You read one of those and it's like, okay.
I got to read Donna Tartt. That's on my 2023 list.
Oh, well, okay. I've been saving A Little Friend, The Little Friend, for my last Donna Tartt read. So maybe we could read that one together.
We could have another Jane Kari discussion. Although I do think I owe AJ to read The Secret History. I think I promised.
You will love it. You will love it.
Yeah. So I
That's
haven't forgotten AJ.
It's one of the only books that I've reread. It's probably my favorite book ever. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna have to see. AJ and I, we have a pact here.
Yes.
See a secret history. Yeah. Yeah. So
Well, I will definitely tune in for that live show. If y'all do a
Okay.
live show on that,
Okay. Okay. But yes, I would also love to read. Was it A Little Friend?
yeah, I think A Little Friend or The
A
Little
Little
Friend.
Friend?
Yeah,
The
The
Little
Little
Friend. Okay.
Friend.
I was like, A Little Life, A Little Friend.
I know I'm getting my littles mixed up now.
Okay. All right. That's a date. Okay. So yeah, I do think that in a way she was trying to describe the state of life, and that kind of circles back into like each one of these characters is a snapshot of the people that you meet within life, and it just happens to be that in this view, like life is horrible and life is depressing and sad and hard. So I do understand why she put so many of them, but I think for readers like us, it just lost the momentum for us because of it.
Yeah.
Okay. What did you think of the ending? Did you expect it? Did you not expect it?
Yes, I expected it 400 pages earlier.
I expected it. I expected it like on page 100. I was like, this is not going to go well.
It's not going to end well. Like, it's one of those things that you know it's coming.
Yeah.
You see it, you know it's coming. It doesn't make it any less hurtful.
Yeah.
When it does get there. And yeah, it's just, and I think maybe that is reflective of how the people in his life probably felt too. They see it coming. They again and again and again are reminded that it's not going to change.
Yeah.
Jude has periods where it kind of waxes and wanes as far as the self-harm goes, but I think that they expected at any moment, they walk around on eggshells. That was something that that just walking around on eggshells because you wonder, is this the comment that sends Jude over the edge? Am I going to make the situation worse? Is there anything I can say to make it better? And yeah, I think they probably knew in their heart of hearts that it was going to happen sooner or later. I think they probably expected him to die of infection. His health was getting progressively worse, and definitely a lot of his health concerns were related to the self-harm. Yes, he has the injuries from being run over by the car by the one maniac who had abducted him and tried to kill him, but
there's a whole nother situation we didn't even talk about.
A whole other thing that we didn't.
The whole thing. Just don't worry about it. Yeah.
But so for that, yes, he has residual injuries that it seems pretty clear they won't get better, that they will get progressively worse. It will be more difficult for him to walk and those sorts of things. But the things that he does to himself are just exacerbating it and just, making, death a factor, because now his immune system is compromised, and now he has these open wounds that will not heal. He's got this infection.
Yeah.
So I think that they probably expected him to make a cut that would not heal, and that would be it. They probably if it didn't end this way, that's probably how it would have ended.
Yeah. There was one line in here, and this did actually strike a chord with me. I think it was Harold that was like reflecting on everything, and he said something that it broke my heart. And he's like, we didn't realize how cruel or something it was to try to keep somebody alive that didn't want to be alive. And that put a whole nother perspective on this for me. And that's also one of the reasons why I really liked Harold, is that he was the character that we could reflect on after the event, and you see the impact that it has on the people that loved him, and just that line alone, it just told everything that Harold was feeling with the aftermath, and about his reflections, his thought on that, and how heartbreaking it is after the fact, and having to know what happened, for the rest of Harold's life. I think that was a very raw moment, and it shocked me when he said that, because I had never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
But that's the level of depth in Harold's character that really it shocked me, and I really appreciated that as well too.
And I think Jude, because he loved the people in his life, he did hang in there as long as he could.
He did. I agree.
And if not for them, because he was in his 50s, right, when he dies. So he would not have made it anywhere close to that, if not for the people in his life.
For William, no.
But there again, with the comment that you pointed out from Harold, you look at that's kind of interesting. That's kind of an interesting comment. It's a little bit refreshing to get that sort of reflection on it, because I think what most people would be saying to themselves after that event is, what did I do wrong? What could I have done to save this person? And, I think that creates a whole other trauma, because then you're internalizing that. And I think you have to be very careful of taking on responsibility for other people, because really at the end of the day, Jude is responsible for Jude.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest themes in this book. They were friends because they were being responsible for Jude. A lot of things happened being responsible for Jude and taking care of Jude, and Andy's care of Jude. And so
Richard, remember the character Richard? He was like the neighbor in the building.
Yeah, he was wonderful.
He was great too. There were so many great people. Yeah.
And I think that's also what makes us a little bit angry about this book. I was angry. I was like, there's so many people, he had such a support system, and so many people don't have that.
They don't have any support.
He had a fantastic career. We're very well financial. I know these are very, very superficial things, but looking at this as a whole, he had friends and family that loved him. He had, dedicated medical, and yet still this is what the result was. And I think that's probably the most heartbreaking part of this book.
Yeah.
That's it. Because then if this can happen to somebody with all those resources, and any person could have less. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was the hardest part of this book, is that he had everything to superficially set him up to succeed, and yet it wasn't enough to shed his demons. So,
and what was frustrating about that as well is that he came from literally nothing, right? He's the baby in the trash can. And he is somehow able to go on to get a law degree, become highly successful, financially solid. So he is able to do those things in different parts of his life. And I think that added to the frustration too, because you see, what he's capable of. And so you see all the potential. But then I think, it kind of speaks to what Jude said when it was never enough. He never sees it as that great, because he doesn't really have an experience with what that looks like for him. As a child, he couldn't really even dream up and imagine what his life could be like. You
Yeah.
know, that's just horrible. I mean, to think of a child not even having a hope.
A dream.
Um,
Yeah. But I think that was the most heartbreaking part of this book
yeah.
too, and I think that might resonate with a lot of people. And I think that's what broke my heart about this book too. That feeling of just being so in the depths of despair that, yeah, even no matter even all with all these things, it didn't help, and that broke me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that concludes my questions. Yep, that was it. Closing thoughts, Kari. What did you think finishing up our discussion?
Wow. I'm glad we read it.
Yeah.
I'm very thankful that you agreed to read it with me. It was great having the emotional support there. I think I needed it. You know, I started marking pages very early in this book. So, you know, I think if you're thinking about reading the book and we haven't scared you off after all of this talk, you know, give it a go. You know, give it a go and see. You know, you have been warned, I think thoroughly.
All the warnings, all the trigger warnings, all of them.
You know, but yeah, I don't regret reading it at all. And have you read anything else by this author?
I have not, although AJ has told me that other books are pretty good as well from Hanya Yanagihara. So
Good.
I am interested. I think one's called like The People in the Trees or The People from the Trees.
Yes, I think he commented earlier, or someone did. Hold on, I don't know. Someone did. Maybe it was AJ.
People in the Trees. There it is, AJ.
Yeah, okay. So AJ commented that we should read that. So
yeah, The People in the Trees. So we'll see, maybe. I do think since we did like the writing style, I'd be interested.
I'm curious. I'm just curious about her writing because you know, again, the writing is what struck me. So I'm curious if it's a one-off or is there something there?
And reading something that was so like gritty and like jarring sometimes story-wise, I'd be really interested to see what other like stories she could come up with too. If they're all going to be just sad, or if it's going to like, you know, structurally, I mean, I'm interested to see what she comes up with.
AJ is the other one. Sad.
Yeah.
The end was shocking.
Okay. Oh, all right. You got me now, AJ. Okay. Okay, so maybe we shall read another Hanya Yanagihara, and maybe we'll have another live stream. Who knows? It could get wild. Who knows? It's 2023, y'all. We don't know. So thank you so much, Kari. That concludes our discussion. Thank you so much for reading this with me. I still can't believe we like did it. You know what I mean? Especially with Lolita in the same year. I'm just, wow.
Feel accomplished.
Feel accomplished. Well, thank you so much for being here with me. Thank you for reading this with me. Thank you all for joining. We had such a great time. Just so everybody knows that I am actually doing a read with Kari's Blackheart Book Club. And we are reading The Wolf and the Watchman. I don't recall the author's name. I'm so sorry, but
it's an author I can't pronounce anyway. So,
okay.
But it's also very dark.
It is
in a different way. In a different way, but it's very, very dark.
It is. It is.
It's like an 18th century murder mystery, and
it's
pretty gruesome. It's pretty gruesome.
Engrossing and gruesome. Yep. So we will be doing a live show discussion. Kari's going to be hosting that one, as she does with all of her Black Hearts Book Clubs picks. So if you want to be depressed with us again. At the end of the month,
I promise we're happy people.
We
really are.
Happy, like, nice, kind people. We just read really, really dark books. So.
We do.
So so much, Kari, again.
Thank you for
joining.
having me, Jane.
Thank you, everyone in the chat, and we hope to see you next time.